America, something just happened inside the Supreme Court that most people haven't even begun to understand. A ruling landed today that doesn't just tweak policy. It rewrites the foundation of how our nation is governed, who holds political power, and what it means to be an American citizen. This is the kind of decision historians look back on and say, that was the moment everything changed. And the left knows it. Because the Supreme Court just handed President Trump and the America First movement two seismic victories. Victories so powerful they will shape elections, reshape immigration, and potentially rewrite constitutional interpretation in ways we haven't seen since the civil rights era. If you care about the direction of this country, if you care about border security, if you care about the integrity of American citizenship, then you need to watch this entire video, because what you're about to hear is not just legal analysis. It is a glimpse into the future of America. Smash the like button, subscribe, and stay with me, because today we're walking through a constitutional shift that may redefine the next decade. Let's begin with the first major ruling, a ruling that directly affects the 2026 midterms. The Supreme Court has now cleared the way for Texas to use a congressional map drawn last summer. A map capable of adding 5 new Republican seats and strengthening the GOP majority in the House. For years, Democrats have relied on race-based gerrymandering, maps designed to guarantee them a permanent advantage. They called it representation, but legally it was discrimination dressed up in academic language. Texas challenged one such map. A lower court claimed the map violated the Constitution because it divided voters by race. But here's the key. Dividing voters by politics is legal. Dividing voters by race is not. The Supreme Court saw through the illusion. They ruled that the lower court overstepped, that it failed to give proper deference to the legislature, and that Texas's map deserved to stand. In plain English, the court told judges, you don't get to invent racial intent where none exists, and that opens the door for every Republican state to pursue the same kind of partisan-neutral redistricting that Democrats have quietly been doing for decades. For the left, this is a nightmare, because the Democrat Party's entire House strategy has relied on racial maps that engineer a built-in advantage, an advantage the court is now poised to dismantle. And the next case on the court's docket, the Voting Rights Act case, may deliver the final blow. If the court overturns the current interpretation of the VRA, the Democrats lose their artificial 30-seat cushion. Gone, erased. Because the court is signaling something very clear. Legislatures have leeway. Intent matters more than outcome, and racial engineering will not be tolerated. This is why the liberal legal establishment is panicking, because the Supreme Court just told them the era of racial gerrymandering is over. This Texas ruling is not just about Texas. It is a legal blueprint. It tells Republican states, you can draw maps with partisan intent, you can compete, you can win. For decades, Republicans were constrained by a standard that Democrats exploited. Even a purely partisan map could be deemed illegal if the result disproportionately affected minority voters. But now the court is shifting toward a more rational framework, one that recognizes political reality instead of ideological fiction. This is why analysts are already saying Republicans may now redraw maps that flip dozens of seats. And once the Voting Rights Act precedent is revisited, which is now far more likely, the Democrats' structural advantage collapses. This is why the court's conservatives are being described as the most consequential majority in a generation. Because they are not just correcting individual cases, they are dismantling a legal architecture built to lock in democratic dominance. And now we move to the second ruling, the one that has every immigration lawyer, progressive activist, and Democrat strategist trembling. The Supreme Court has agreed to hear the challenge to President Trump's order on birthright citizenship. Birthright citizenship, guaranteed under the 14th Amendment, has been treated as sacred doctrine for more than a century. But here is the truth most Americans never hear. The 14th Amendment was written in 1868 to protect freed slaves, not to guarantee automatic citizenship to the children of illegal migrants, temporary visa holders, or people with no permanent ties to the United States. In 1898, the Supreme Court decided the famous Wong Kim Ark case. That ruling used the word domicile more than 20 times, meaning citizenship applied to those whose parents had permanent allegiance to America. But the modern interpretation twisted that meaning into universal citizenship. Regardless of legal status, Trump's executive order attempted to restore the original intent. If the parents are not here lawfully, the child does not automatically become a citizen. And the Supreme Court is now saying this question deserves a fresh review, because if the court affirms that at least one parent must have lawful permanent residence, then the entire incentive structure driving mass illegal migration collapses. No more anchor babies, no more exploitation of the backlog, no more gaming the system by having children in the US while waiting years for asylum hearings. The entire scam, built on birthright citizenship plus legal limbo, disappears. This is why the media is freaking out, because even MSNBC admitted Trump's lawyers actually have a compelling argument. And when 4 justices vote to hear a case, it means the court thinks the question is genuinely unresolved. Many legal analysts predict a 5-4 ruling that reinterprets the 14th Amendment, not abolishing citizenship, but restoring it to its original meaning. And the consequences would be enormous. Because the current system rewards rule breakers and punishes people who follow the law, it dilutes citizenship, it incentivizes fraud, it fuels demographic manipulation, and it creates a permanent class of people dependent on government benefits. Ending that cycle is one of the most pro-American moves a Supreme Court could make. Think about the last 60 years. America went from a nation that was almost 85% white to a nation undergoing rapid transformation. Much of that shift ties back to immigration policy, especially the loophole created by universal birthright citizenship. Every illegal migrant who crosses the border knows the game. Have children here, gain leverage, delay deportation, eventually benefit from a system designed to reward the very behavior it claims to discourage. If the court closes this loophole, mass migration becomes far less attractive, because suddenly the reward disappears, and the United States stops being viewed as a country where citizenship can be obtained by simply crossing a border and having a baby. This is why the court taking the case is so significant. If the issue was settled, the court would have summarily dismissed it, but they didn't. They chose to hear it, which means the Constitution may soon be read differently than it has been for 125 years, and that shift could slow the demographic pressure reshaping America. These two rulings together, district maps and citizenship, form a 1-2 punch. One strengthens Republican representation. The other weakens one of the Democrats' most powerful demographic engines. If the court follows through, the 2026 midterms may look nothing like the last decade. Republicans will be able to draw competitive maps, Democrats lose their racial-based advantage, and the immigration incentives that fuel political realignment begin to collapse. This is why the left is panicking, because the judicial architecture that protected them for generations is being dismantled. Not by legislation, not by executive orders, but by the Supreme Court, the final arbiter of the Constitution. The reason the left is panicking right now isn't because they fear losing an argument. It's because they fear losing an entire system that has benefited them for generations. Birthright citizenship has become more than a legal doctrine. It has become a political engine. For decades, the Democratic Party quietly relied on a combination of immigration incentives, judicial interpretation, and policy loopholes to shape the electorate in their favor. They called it inclusion, diversity, or fairness. But structurally, it functioned as a demographic strategy, one that depended on a steady flow of migrants who, over time, became dependent on government programs and predisposed toward a particular political ideology. And when the Supreme Court signals that this architecture may no longer be viable, the reaction is immediate: outrage, fear, and alarm. Because if birthright citizenship is reinterpreted, even modestly, the demographic engine sputters, the incentives shift, migration slows, and the political calculus that has shaped the last half-century collapses. That is why progressive legal groups are flooding the media with warnings. That is why activists are screaming about xenophobia and constitutional crisis. They are not defending the Constitution. They are defending a political advantage. And when a policy advantage is exposed as unsustainable, the panic is always the same, because the ideology has no backup plan. Patriots understand this clearly. When the incentives are wrong, the outcomes are wrong. And when the court restores the original meaning of the Constitution, it doesn't destroy America. It strengthens it. Birthright citizenship has long operated as a structural component of the United States migration regime, but its impact has been far greater than most Americans realize. From a political science perspective, the doctrine fundamentally altered the incentives embedded within the immigration system. By granting automatic citizenship to children born on US soil, regardless of parental legal status, the system effectively lowered the cost of unauthorized migration while increasing the political and economic returns associated with it. In institutional terms, this created a perverse equilibrium in which the migration flow became self-reinforcing, sustained not only by humanitarian narratives, but by a deeply embedded legal mechanism. Originalists have long argued that the 14th Amendment was crafted in a very specific historical context, namely the integration of freed slaves into the civic body after the Civil War. The framers sought to prevent states from arbitrarily excluding former slaves from citizenship. They did not intend to construct a universal citizenship mechanism that would apply to the children of transient migrants, asylum seekers, or individuals present in the country unlawfully. Modern immigration patterns, particularly the mass unauthorized migration that emerged in the late 20th century, was simply not foreseeable in 1868. From an analytical standpoint, the doctrine became a classic example of institutional drift, where a rule expands beyond its original intent due to judicial interpretation, bureaucratic practice, and political incentives. Over time, the interpretation hardened into orthodoxy, even as the demographic realities of migration shifted dramatically. The result was a policy architecture that quietly facilitated the growth of a population segment whose citizenship status was tied not to lawful residence but to the happenstance of birthplace. Political scientists describe this as a feedback loop in citizenship acquisition. Unauthorized migrants had a strong incentive to reproduce within US borders because each US-born child introduced legal leverage in immigration proceedings. Courts facing children who were US citizens often granted greater deference to family unity. This in turn reduced the likelihood of deportation, reinforcing the original incentive. In effect, the doctrine created a structural buffer against enforcement, a buffer not intended by the framers, but sustained by a century of interpretive expansion. Trump's challenge disrupts this equilibrium by returning the focus to constitutional intent rather than judicial accretion. By questioning whether the amendment requires parental lawful presence or at least a form of permanent domicile, the argument reintroduces the concept of civic belonging as something earned through lawful association rather than inherited through mere geography. If the court adopts this interpretation, the migration incentive structure shifts overnight. Unauthorized migration becomes far less attractive because the expected political and legal returns diminish. The downstream effects ripple across demographics, electoral politics, labor markets, and border security. In political science terms, this is not just a legal adjustment. It is a change in the system's underlying incentive architecture, and such changes reshape nations. Patriots understand that a nation is not held together by slogans or committee meetings. It is held together by structure, the invisible framework of law, identity, and responsibility. When that structure is weakened, the entire edifice trembles, even if the lights are still on. Patriots look at America the way an engineer studies a bridge. Every beam matters. Every joint carries weight. Every crack demands attention before it spreads. Because they know a bridge doesn't collapse all at once. It collapses when neglect accumulates, quietly, until the moment of failure arrives. They recognize borders not as political symbols, but as the load-bearing pillars of sovereignty. Remove those pillars, and the architecture of the republic becomes unstable. Patriots understand that sovereignty is not a preference, it is a prerequisite. A country without control over who enters and who remains is like a fortress with open gates, impressive from a distance, fragile up close. And patriots feel the cost of that fragility in real time. They see it in classrooms stretched thin, in hospitals pushed beyond capacity, in neighborhoods facing pressures they never asked for. They see the consequences not as abstract policy debates, but as daily realities that shape the future of their children. For them, policy is not theory, it is lived experience. Meanwhile, progressive elites move through a world where consequences are buffered by distance. They speak in polished sentences and academic certainty while remaining insulated from the fractures beneath the surface. Their ideas shine in conference halls, glowing like lanterns, but lanterns do not hold weight. They illuminate, they do not stabilize. Elites prefer solutions that look elegant on paper, systems engineered for inclusivity rather than resilience. Patriots prefer systems engineered for survival. Elites chase ideological symmetry. Patriots defend national equilibrium. The contrast is stark. Elites build narratives. Patriots build nations. Patriots also understand something deeper, something older than modern politics. That identity is the anchor of liberty. When identity dissolves, liberty loses its mooring. A people who forget who they are cannot defend what they have. A republic without roots cannot stand against the wind. In this sense, patriots carry a kind of historical memory, a memory forged through wars, hardships, and moments when the nation teetered but never surrendered. They remember Washington crossing the Delaware, Lincoln preserving a divided country, Reagan restoring confidence in a weakened era. These moments echo because they remind us that America endures not through softness, but through resolve. Progressive elites speak of transformation. Patriots speak of preservation. Transformation without a foundation becomes instability. Preservation without conviction becomes decay. Patriots choose conviction. And so the divide becomes more than political. It becomes philosophical. One side believes the nation can be reshaped without consequence. The other side believes the nation survives only when its foundations are defended. Patriots understand that America is not a project to be redesigned. It is a legacy to be safeguarded. They understand that when a nation reaches a crossroads, it must choose between continuity and erosion, strength and uncertainty, memory and amnesia, and they know which side keeps the republic alive. America is at a crossroads. The court has opened the door to reforms that could restore the integrity of citizenship, secure the border, and level the political playing field. These are not partisan issues. These are national survival issues. Because a country that cannot define who belongs, cannot enforce its laws, cannot safeguard its elections, cannot remain a sovereign nation. What happens next will determine the trajectory of the United States for decades, and patriots everywhere need to understand what is at stake. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next constitutional shift. Because when the Supreme Court moves, America moves, and I'll be here with you every step of the way. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.